Hi, friend. If you are new here, welcome to my channel. My name is Kayla Tyshen, and I help parents have more confidence in their parenting, more connection with their kids, and more joy in their home. I also talk about my parenting journey with fatigue and illness as a type 1 diabetic. So, subscribe so you don't miss these videos. And if you're a parent looking for support, check out the other videos on my channel for evidence-based support for raising kids in a way that's respectful, that's introspective, and that ultimately leads to deeper relationships with your children. I am super excited to talk about how we can support our children when they have big emotions. Like we were just talking about, it can feel overwhelming. And, there's so many conflicting opinions and advice. Do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. And sometimes that can add to the overwhelm of, how do we handle this situation? So I want to talk about, kind of the brain development that's going on, a little bit about the nervous system and how we can, understand our child a little bit more and support them in these tough times. Because, yeah, it's hard for us. It's also hard for them, right? They don't want to be, overwhelmed and dysregulated. Um, again, my name is Kayla, and I'm a certified parent coach, and I also have training in interpersonal neurobiology under Dr. Dan Siegel. And I also just love the Montessori approach, so I kind of take pieces from there and looking at kind of the developmental stages that the Montessori approach highlights, I feel like are really helpful as well. The first thing I want to dive into is why our children have such big emotions that sometimes seem just like completely unreasonable, illogical, just insane sometimes. And it's like, what do we even do in this situation? And yes, it is illogical and unreasonable and not rational because their upstairs brain that is responsible for reasoning, learning, thinking, decision making isn't developed until 25. So they are mainly living in their downstairs brain, their limbic system that is, the limbic system is where we have those fight, flight, freeze reactions to situations. It's our nervous system and that brainstem and limbic system are constantly scanning the environment, looking to our caregivers for cues of safety and cues of danger. The interesting thing about the nervous system is that, it's developed to keep us safe and to have these automatic reactions in order to protect ourselves. But obviously, there are times where we might feel unsafe, even if it's not necessarily a life-threatening situation. But we interpret, us as adults and our children can interpret these signals as unsafe. And so, particularly for children, they are looking to their caregivers for those cues of safety. But we can even accidentally communicate cues of threat through our tone of voice, through our body language and posture, through our facial expressions, and without, anyone realizing it, all of a sudden our child is responding to our cues, and their fight or flight system is being triggered. And so what, one thing that I just want to clarify is that we don't want our children to be robots, right? Like, having emotions is healthy. And so even though sometimes the expression of those emotions can feel overwhelming and can feel threatening to us, it can trigger our fight or flight or freeze responses. We can actually, because we have a developed upstairs brain, we can practice bringing it online, bringing our parasympathetic nervous system online, that calm state. We can actually practice accessing that so that in these situations, when our children are in fight or flight, when they're expressing emotions, we can actually access safety so that we can give them that sense of safety. So when it comes to emotions, I think it is very key to remember that, yes, we don't want robots. We do want children who can feel emotions. And so sometimes things that we can do, sometimes we do things that can indirectly communicate that we actually are very uncomfortable with their emotions, and can make our child feel like expressing emotions is unacceptable. And so, even just saying little things like, oh, Celeste, it's not a big deal, stop crying, there's nothing to cry about, are just little ways that we can subtly communicate that, like, actually expressing emotions is not okay, when in reality, it's so important for our children to feel safe expressing emotions, and to have caregivers that are okay, are comfortable with a wide range of emotions. And this actually helps foster resilience. So I think one of the big things we all want for our children is that when they're in challenging situations later in life, they can persevere and overcome them, right? That's kind of the main idea of resilience. Like, we want our children to be able to face hard things and overcome and even grow from challenges. And so a big key to this is helping them develop those emotion regulation skills. And the way that we do that is, we talked about how their upstairs brain isn't fully developed yet. They're living in that downstairs brain, that emotional brain. But we want to help them strengthen the pathway from their downstairs brain to their upstairs brain, so that when they're later in life in these situations where they're triggered, they're in a challenge, or, maybe even in some potentially dangerous situation, that they can, instead of just reacting in the moment, that they actually can access that thinking, that reasoning, that logical decision-making part of their brain. And the way we actually help them strengthen that connection is through co-regulation. And so co-regulation is a vitally important skill, and I think it's often misunderstood. I think sometimes co-regulation can be painted as getting my child to calm down, when actually co-regulation is turning inward to ourselves, and kind of like what I touched on earlier, being able to connect with our own bodies and our own emotions in these moments of tension and actively regulate ourselves. And then we communicate that regulation. Our nervous systems are communicating back and forth. And if we're actively regulating ourselves, then we can communicate that safety, that calm, and it might not happen right away, right? Because actually the goal isn't shutting down the emotions. The goal isn't getting my child to calm down. The goal is being a connected, safe adult. And through that, through being connected, being safe, and being regulated, that actually helps to build those connections in the brain from the downstairs to the upstairs brain, from the emotional brain to the logical brain. So I think, this is foundational, right, to parenting, and to handling these big emotions in a way that's not only going to help our child in the moment, but also going to build those skills, build that connection in their brains for the long term. So co-regulation starts with us. It's this ability to regulate in these moments that then communicates through our body language, through our facial expressions, through the calm in our body. It then communicates that regulation to our children. So another thing that I wanted to touch on is, and I actually wanted to, for this workshop, just talk a little bit and kind of give some of the basics, but hear from you guys and talk through, some of your situations so that it can actually be practical and helpful. And so it's not just me talking at you the whole time. So, but one thing I did want to touch on is this idea of curiosity. Curiosity is such an important piece of figuring out what is actually happening in our own bodies and our own nervous systems. A lot of times in these moments of big emotions, it triggers something in us that could potentially be from our own childhoods. So for example, for me personally, something that I've really had to work on throughout my childhood, I was told over and over again that I was too emotional. I was the emotional one. And yeah, I mean, that I was told that so many times, like, why do you have to be so emotional? Why, all of that. And so emotions felt super unsafe, especially intense emotions. And so what I learned to do was to shut down those emotions, to ignore them. Basically, I mean, and I still have to be very intentional about this, but I would much rather just not feel any of the so-called negative emotions. Anger, anxiety and fear was also like a no-feel emotion in our family. Like, it was always bravery, courage that was very much elevated, and this idea of, any type of fear or anxiety was very much not acceptable. So I actually struggled with anxiety for several years and didn't realize that's what it was. Like I would have these almost like panic attack moments where I felt like I couldn't breathe and where there was just so much what's the word? Like just energy in my body, like feeling like I was like crawling out of my skin type of feeling. No idea it was anxiety. No idea. And tried to ignore it and just like keep moving on. That obviously didn't work. And so I've learned a lot of tools. But what I want to get back to is then when my child would show these big emotions, my automatic reaction to that was to want to shut it down. Um, and that was really coming from a discomfort in myself with big emotions that stemmed from not being allowed to express them in my own childhood. And so really getting curious about in these moments of tension with our children, what is it that's being triggered? What is it that I'm feeling in my body? Like a lot of times we actually feel the tension in our bodies in these triggering moments, but oftentimes we aren't very connected with what our bodies are actually feeling. And so we oftentimes just ignore it instead of actually tuning in and identifying, oh my goodness, like my shoulders are so tense right now, or my hands are in fists and I don't even know why, or wow, like I have, tension in my head or, a big headache right now. And so even just tuning in, bringing awareness to what's happening in our bodies, being able to name it, as well as being able to name the actual emotions that we're feeling. There's a phrase coined by Dr. Dan Siegel, bless you, called name it to tame it. And so this is this idea that if we can actually put a name to intense emotions, it actually helps to bring down the intensity a little bit. So this is helpful for us. It's also helpful for our children to help them name some of those emotions. The other thing we can get curious about is what is happening for our children in these moments. And every child is different and unique, and every child has, different things based on their experiences that might trigger them and give them that feeling of not being safe. And so, it could be things like, they had a really overwhelming day at school because there was a big class party and really loud music. And they come home and they're just so overstimulated that they just have, they have all this pent up energy that just needs to come out. Or, it could be, and particularly, I think one thing that can be really helpful is looking at the sensory stimulation that our child might be experiencing. I think, a lot of times we can identify if like, oh my gosh, they're hungry, they haven't eaten yet, and it's past lunchtime, it makes sense. They're losing it, they're melting down, or they missed a nap, or they went to bed late the night before, right? So I think a lot of times we can identify these types of things because they're a little bit more obvious. What's a little bit less obvious, I think, can be the sensory input and the sensory overstimulation that can come from a variety of factors depending on each child. And it really varies. Children often have different sensory needs. They can be easily overstimulated by certain sensory inputs, and then they can actually be sensory seeking in other ways where they actually really need sensory input in order to calm them down. And so it really depends on each child. But a lot of times, things like, movement and swinging or rocking, sometimes children can really appreciate, like, we talk about like weighted blankets and things like that, that when they're bundled up and they kind of feel that pressure on their bodies, that can be really calming for some children. So anyways, about that curiosity, really getting curious about the sensory aspect. Is there loud music? Is there really bright lights? Those kinds of things. And then helping to, and sometimes there's not a solution. Sometimes you're in a grocery store and there's a lot of people and a lot of noise, and it's not really an option to leave. You need to finish grocery shopping. But just the awareness of like, okay, this is what could be going on for my child right now can be so helpful in giving us that empathy and kind of, I feel like, expanding our window of tolerance a little bit to be able to say like, okay, I know that they're struggling right now. This is maybe what's happening. So that curiosity can really help give us the empathy that we need to be able to be present and then work on regulating ourselves. So let's see. As adults, we talked about this key being regulating ourselves, connecting with nature, being outside, feeling the sun on our faces, touching, grass, trees, leaves. And then you're also talking about singing. Right. And that is such a powerful way to communicate safety is through song, through our own voice. Or even playing calming music can be really helpful. And then the other thing you mentioned is movement. Moving our bodies, changing our state can be so, so helpful for, like you said, us. And most of our time. You brought up a really great point that, if this is our cup and there's so much stress and so many responsibilities and maybe expectations that maybe we're putting on ourselves, maybe other people are putting on us, or we think other people are putting them on us. And then our stress cup is filled, and then maybe our child has a meltdown. It's just that last little drop in the cup where everything then spills out. And so it's, there's not necessarily like easy solutions or one size fits all solutions, but examining that cup and those things that are causing stress and being intentional to, so things like deep breathing, which activate the parasympathetic nervous system. When we can breathe deeply and expanding our bellies, that activates the vagus nerve, which brings the parasympathetic nervous system online. The slow exhale also helps bring that calm and release some of those stress hormones. And so things like deep breathing can become more accessible in moments of, high stress with our children or with our child if we have built it into a daily practice. And so, a lot of times, and I'm not saying deep breathing is like gonna fix all of the problems, but it does help. It is a tool that does help bring the parasympathetic nervous system online. And in moments of stress, it's going to be easier to access that tool if we practice it regularly. And that goes for other tools as well. If we're talking about body awareness, it helps if we have built in practices in not stressful moments where we're bringing awareness to what's happening inside of us. Same with being able to identify emotions. And so, yeah, I don't know if that kind of helps to address some of the things that you were sharing. But yeah, feel free if you have a specific question that comes to mind. Yeah, and I just want to say that it is challenging. And I think sometimes we can it can be easier for us to have compassion for our children than for ourselves. But knowing that, I mean, a lot of times these patterns are really deeply rooted in our own childhoods. You mentioned, like, I find myself doing what my mom did, right? Like these things were things that were modeled for us, and then we practiced and built those connections in our brains in really strong ways. But the beautiful thing is that our brains are able to change. They have neuroplasticity, which means that we can create new connections. And so there are every time we do something a different way. So we only have to do something a different way once to form a new connection in our brain. And then obviously the more we practice it, the more that connection strengthened, and then the easier it becomes to choose that different pattern in the future. One way of building those new connections is by, visualizing or thinking through, okay, here, like, if a situation happened and I'm like, I did not handle that the way I wanted to handle that. And in this situation, this is what I'm going to do in the future. And then really think, like, imagining in my brain the situation and responding in the way that I want to. Just that visualizing forms a new connection. Super cool thing about our brains that it's not even just by, physically doing the new behavior, but that visualization helps build those pathways. So thinking through, okay, here's how I want to handle that in the future, and really replaying that scene in your mind while handling it the way that you want to can be super helpful. So we talked about some of those ways that we can regulate ourselves, that we can help children, move their bodies, get in nature, regulate their nervous systems. Also, I did want to bring it back to what you said. So I think there is a balance between like sometimes we can go to these tools for regulating, like going outside or these other things, as a way to, like, shut down the emotions. and distract, like, okay, they're they're throwing a tantrum, so let's just like distract them and try to get them thinking about something else. And so looking at our own motivations for doing that can be really helpful, because yeah, we don't want to use these tools for regulation as distractions from feeling. And sometimes our kids just really need to cry. Like sometimes they just need to get it out and cry and just say what they need to say and express what they need to express. Um, I remember the moment when I realized that I didn't have to try to get my child to calm down. Because when we also, I feel like when we are in that place of like, okay, what do I do to get them to calm down? What do I do to like get them to stop crying and to just, regulate and move through this, which is actually not regulating. Like when we shut down their emotions, it just gets stored in their bodies and then comes out later. But it was like, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna let her cry and scream, and I'm just gonna sit here and just be there. And and then like it was a while. She cried and screamed and did all the other things. And then all of a sudden, she just got up and she's like, okay, like I want to draw, like, and move on to the next thing. It was like, yeah. It was like she just needed to have a safe place where she was allowed to get it all out, and then she was ready to move on. And it's that completing that stress cycle where she was able to just release everything that she needed to release, and then you were good to go. So I wanted to affirm that, yeah, sometimes it's like, yeah, they just need to cry. Yeah. And in the presence of a safe adult, and then they're good to go. When we aren't able to feel our emotions, when we suppress them or push them down, and then they get bottled up, I mean, it can lead to like a variety of issues. Like when stress isn't able to be released, the impact that stress has on our bodies is crazy. I mean, like autoimmune diseases, like an extreme reaction. But yeah, I mean, there's so stress really does like impact us in such profound ways. It is so beautiful the way that parents are really reflecting on their own childhoods and saying, okay, this is what I don't want to do. And trying to figure out like, okay, what is the right way? Like, if I'm not doing that, what do I do instead? And so I just think, just in kind of to wrap this up and close out, I think just to put this in the mix too, that even though we want our kids to be able to express emotions in a safe place, we want to be able to actively access our own safety so that we can communicate safety, right? We want to be that safe place for our children. We also can and need to set boundaries around behavior. And so boundaries are such an important part of actually feeling safe, our children feeling safe. They need boundaries. They need to know where the lines are, what is, what is acceptable behavior and what behavior isn't. At the same time, because our children can't necessarily access that thinking logical brain and they're very much in the fight or flight, reactions when they are dysregulated, we want to understand that it's our responsibility to hold the boundaries, not theirs. They're not developmentally able to to sometimes control themselves. And so being the adult, being the safe place looks like helping them and holding those boundaries when they're out of control. It can be tricky, especially in those kinds of situations, right? Where you're like, can the neighbors hear this? Are they waking up? Like and part of what can maybe play into that is, oh no, what are the neighbors going to think about me? How are they going to view me as a parent or as a person? And so really being able to think through, our own motivations in these moments and, find a way for our children to be able to express those emotions safely. And so I don't remember where I heard this, but I love this idea of having like three main boundaries that kind of everything else falls into these categories: respect for self, respect for others, and respect for the environment. So when when our child is hitting us or someone else, or doing something to maybe really harm themselves or breaking something, then that's when we step in and help them. They're out of control, obviously, and they don't want to be out of control, right? But because they're having trouble accessing that upstairs brain, that's when we can step in and gently, like, we intervene and we stop the behavior because they're not able to stop themselves. But yeah, sometimes I do find respect for others can be a challenge when we're out in public. What kinds of behaviors are stepping over that line, because also kids are kids and they should be allowed to exist in public. They should be, exactly. They're learning. They're not gonna handle every situation perfectly. So navigating that balance is absolutely challenging. Just to know, okay, am I having too high of expectations of my child right now? Or is this something that, I need to remove them from this situation? Thanks so much for watching my video. Leave any questions you have in the comments and I will get back to you. If you are needing support in your parenting and you're interested in working with me, check out my website, www.yourconsciousparentcoach.com. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next video.